To move 80,000 pounds of freight across the country, a heavy commercial transport truck has to constantly fight physical resistance. The engine burns fuel to overcome wind drag and rolling friction, but the traditional B2B billing invoice completely ignores these dynamic forces. It sits static. When logistics providers bundle their operational overhead and fuel estimates into a single flat fee, they create a fatal flaw in their pricing architecture. Energy markets are volatile. A sudden spike in diesel prices instantly erodes the underlying assumptions of a fixed-price contract, eating directly into the carrier's operating margin. Distance compounds this problem. Pushing a rig across longer routes increases fuel consumption non-linearly because of compounding mechanical friction and the heightened logistical oversight required. If a provider fails to decouple the core value of their transport asset from the fluctuating cost of energy, they end up paying for market volatility and client-side inefficiencies straight out of their baseline profit. The industry solution is strict decoupling. The invoice splits into two categories: the base asset rent and a fluctuating fuel pass-through. The base rate is the inviolable cost of physical hardware and labor. It acts as an independent service anchor, immune to fuel prices. To handle volatile energy costs, we use a progressive fuel surcharge, or FSC. An FSC is an additional fee applied to a base freight rate to account for the fluctuating cost of fuel. It acts as a dynamic, mathematically derived adjustment that absorbs market shocks without touching the base margin. True margin protection relies on treating fuel strictly as a transparent, auditable, and mathematically derived pass-through cost. Accurate rate calculations rely on three specific benchmarks. First, a standard base rate of $3.75 per kilometer. Second, a heavy vehicle consumption rate of 25 liters per 100 kilometers. And third, a fixed fuel reference of $2.08 per liter. These three metrics create a floating baseline for the entire service network. They standardize the starting cost before the truck leaves the yard. The progressive logic activates at the first major trigger point, the 100-kilometer mark. At this exact distance, the surcharge initiates at 15%. This offsets the specific energy expenditure calculated from our $2.08 baseline. Establishing these rigid starting points empowers corporate procurement officers to mathematically verify the exact foundation of a quoted rate. This chart shows how the fuel surcharge impacts total shipping costs as distance increases. The rule is precise. For every 100 kilometers traveled, the surcharge scales upward by 1.25%. Look at the 500-kilometer milestone. The surcharge is 20%. At 1,000 kilometers, compounding physics demand a steeper adjustment. The progressive logic pushes the fuel surcharge up to 26.25%. The surcharge on this single trip pushes the total rate to $4,734.38. This progressive model systematically mitigates the operational risk of extended routes. Without it, long-haul fuel requirements would entirely consume a flat-rate profit margin. Logistics calculations change entirely when you introduce specialized recovery equipment, like a tow dolly lifting an immobilized vehicle. Specialized assets like the high-speed tow dolly require a dual-tier billing structure. This structure accounts for the duration of the deployment, not just distance. This guide outlines the high-speed dolly rate scaling. Phase 1 represents the initial hookup, covering the first 60 minutes of deployment. During this phase, the fuel surcharge is 0%, absorbed by the primary recovery base fee. The margin threat emerges during extended operations. Pulling a vehicle on a dolly for multiple hours introduces massive aerodynamic drag and additional weight that drains the truck's fuel efficiency. To counter drag, Tier 2 triggers at minute 61. The dolly transitions to a 75-cent per minute rate. Simultaneously, the progressive fuel surcharge activates at 16.5%, increasing every 10 minutes until reaching 25% at 4 hours. This minute-by-minute system protects margins by ensuring that the heightened energy expenditure is billed in direct proportion to the actual physical drag. Beyond base rates and fuel surcharges, the final layer of the billing matrix requires strict regional regulatory compliance. Let's examine the specific tax framework of British Columbia, Canada. British Columbia operates on a separate sales tax system, rather than utilizing a combined harmonized sales tax, or HST. The HST is a consumption tax used in other provinces that blends federal and provincial rates into a single charge. There are two distinct tax layers applied to most taxable goods and services here: the 5% federal goods and services tax, the GST, and the 7% provincial sales tax. While the service provider is legally responsible for calculating and remitting these taxes to the government, the final financial burden always falls on the purchaser. Total invoice transparency requires a clear, undeniable line between operational base rates, mathematical fuel surcharges, and non-negotiable government taxes. When you implement a precise mathematical pricing architecture, the final result is a highly functioning and predictable operational environment. Progressive pricing works because it strips away the guesswork. It is fundamentally auditable and eliminates the margin-destroying habit of arbitrary rounding. By cleanly isolating the base asset rate from the scaling fuel surcharge, logistics providers create an ironclad, verifiable trail for insurance adjusters and third-party billing reviewers. Profitable architectures demand that we stop treating energy as a fixed operational cost and start treating it as the volatile liability it actually is. Sustainable margin protection ultimately relies on recognizing fuel as a strict pass-through cost. Do that, and your core asset value remains exactly where it belongs, untouched and fully realized.